How could the same hands that coaxed life from formless clay tremble so at the thought of Sunday lunch? Elena traced the damp, cool curve of the bowl taking shape beneath her fingers, the familiar rhythm of the wheel, a counterpoint to the anxious flutter in her chest. Outside her small studio, the Andalusian sun climbed higher, bleaching the whitewashed walls of the Pueblo Blanco until they gleamed, casting sharp dark shadows down the narrow cobblestone street. Geraniums, impossibly red, spilled from terracotta pots on wrought-iron balconies. The air, already warming, carried the faint scent of jasmine and brewing coffee from the plaza nearby. It was a beauty that usually soothed her, but not today. Not with lunch at Carmen's looming. Elena sighed, the sound lost in the gentle whir of the wheel. Late 50s. A widow for longer than she cared to calculate sometimes. Mother to Mateo, who lived and worked in Barcelona, his calls warm but increasingly brief, filled with the bustle of a life far removed from this quiet village nestled in the hills. And Elena, the potter. Elena, who poured her solitude and memories into earth and water, finding a fragile peace in creation. A peace easily shattered, her hands stilled. She remembered last month's gathering. Carmen, her late husband Ricardo's elder sister, surveying Elena's small living space, her eyes sharp. "Still managing in this little place, Elena. You must find it cramped. Ricardo, bless his soul, always wanted more for you." It wasn't overtly cruel, yet the implication lingered, that Elena's life, her choices, were somehow diminished, less than. A failure to live up to unspoken expectations. Elena had murmured something non-committal, retreating into herself, the familiar heat rising in her cheeks. Carmen. Practical, traditional Carmen, whose own house was larger, whose children were married with children of their own, who seemed to embody the village's unspoken benchmarks of success. Carmen, who wielded concern like a subtle weapon. Elena knew, deep down, her sister-in-law likely meant no real harm. It was just her way, the way of many here, directness often mistaken for honesty, judgment veiled as care. Que dirán, what will people say? The invisible thread that held the village together, sometimes comfortingly, sometimes constrictingly. She wiped her hands on her apron, the rough canvas a familiar comfort. The age spots on her skin, stark against the pale clay dust, seemed more prominent lately. She often found herself tucking her hands away. Another small vulnerability Carmen sometimes homed in on. "You should use a stronger cream, Elena. Your hands are starting to show." Enough. She couldn't let the dread paralyze her. It was just lunch. Family obligation. She forced herself to focus on the smooth symmetry of the bowl, the way the light caught its still wet surface. Find the center, she told herself, just like with the clay. Find your own center. But as the church bells began to chime the hour, announcing the inevitable approach of midday, Elena felt her carefully constructed calm begin to crumble, like dry earth underfoot. The air in Carmen's dining room felt thick with the aroma of roasting lamb and unspoken expectations. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the heavy, dark wood furniture and the meticulously arranged family photographs on the sideboard. Elena sat opposite Carmen, forcing a smile, picking at a stray thread on her simple linen skirt. Carmen's husband, Manuel, presided benignly at the head of the table, while their grown son and his wife made polite, slightly strained conversation. "So, Elena," Carmen began, her voice carrying easily over the clink of cutlery, "how is the pottery going?" The slight pause before pottery made it sound like a quaint, slightly embarrassing hobby. Elena felt the familiar tightening in her chest. "It's going well. Thank you, Carmen. Steady." "Steady." Carmen raised a skeptical eyebrow. She took a delicate sip of wine. "Is it truly practical, though? At our age, all that messy clay. Perhaps something more reliable? Have you thought about helping Maria in the bakery? She needs someone dependable." There it was. The implication that her art, her passion, the thing that gave her life meaning after Ricardo, was merely playing with mud, impractical, unsuitable. A suggestion disguised as helpful advice, delivered with the casual confidence of someone who believed they knew best. Elena could feel the eyes of the others at the table, perhaps sympathetic, perhaps merely uncomfortable. She felt exposed, judged. The roast lamb suddenly tasted like ash in her mouth. "I enjoy my work, Carmen," she managed, her voice quieter than she intended. "It brings me satisfaction." "Satisfaction doesn't pay the bills, dear," Carmen countered smoothly, turning to her daughter-in-law. "Luisa, "You must try this sauce. It's my mother's recipe." The conversation moved on, leaving Elena adrift in a sea of inadequacy. She retreated into silence, nodding and smiling mechanically, the earlier resolve to find her centre dissolving completely. The rest of the lunch passed in a blur of forced pleasantries. As she walked home later, the afternoon sun casting long shadows down the winding streets, the beauty of the village felt mocking. The scent of jasmine was cloying. Carmen's words echoed in her mind, each syllable a tiny hammer blow against her fragile self-worth. Still playing with mud, hardly practical. Satisfaction doesn't pay the bills. She reached her small house, the sanctuary of her studio, feeling less like a refuge and more like evidence of her impractical, unsatisfactory life. The trembling in her hands had returned. The following days were draped in a familiar melancholy. Elena found herself taking the longer, less direct route to the market, skirting the main plaza during the hours Carmen was likely to be doing her own shopping. The thought of another helpful suggestion, another veiled critique, was enough to make her change direction, heart pounding disproportionately. Her studio felt cold, unwelcoming. The clay sat untouched on the bench, reproachful in its stillness. Carmen's words had lodged themselves deep inside, sprouting insidious roots of self-doubt. Was she just playing? Was her passion foolish, impractical? Was she, at nearly 60, simply failing to measure up? She tried talking to Sophia, her neighbour, whose cheerful bougainvillea spilled over the shared wall between their patios. Sophia, ever outgoing, listened with nods of sympathy as Elena vaguely alluded to feeling discouraged. "Hey, Elena, don't let Carmen get to you," Sophia declared, patting Elena's arm with plump insistence. "She's always been like that, you know. Just ignore her. Live your life." Then in the next breath, "But you know, Maria's daughter, the one who works at the bank in Malaga, just got a big promotion, bought a new car. Imagine." Elena forced a smile. Sophia meant well, truly. But the advice felt hollow, the comparison unintentional yet sharp. Ignore her. How? When the words burrowed under your skin. And the casual mention of conventional success only highlighted Elena's own unconventional, apparently inadequate path. She felt more alone than before, misunderstood even by those who tried to be kind. The village, usually a source of quiet community, suddenly felt like a network of judging eyes, Carmen's opinions subtly amplified by the collective consciousness of the pueblo. "¿Qué dirán?" The question hung in the air, unspoken but potent. A small breakthrough came unexpectedly. A tourist couple, charmed by the authenticity of the village, wandered into her studio, drawn by the simple elegance of her pieces displayed near the open door. They spoke halting Spanish, praising the texture, the form, the quiet beauty of her work. They bought 2 bowls and a small vase, their genuine admiration a balm to Elena's bruised spirit. For a few hours the weight lifted. She worked with renewed energy, the feel of the clay familiar and grounding once more. The uplift was short-lived. Running into Carmen at the tiny village pharmacia was unavoidable. Elena needed her allergy medication. Carmen was picking up a prescription for Manuel. "Elena, dear," Carmen greeted her, her eyes doing a quick, assessing sweep. "You're looking a little pale. Are you eating properly? Mateo really should come home more often, check on his mother. It's not right, a woman alone." Deflated. The word perfectly described the sensation, like a balloon pricked. The brief joy from the sale vanished, replaced by the familiar ache of loneliness and the sting of implied neglect, both her son's and her own. Avoidance wasn't the answer. Ignoring the comments clearly wasn't working. The hurt kept finding its way in. Something had to change, but it wasn't Carmen, and it wasn't the village. It had to be her. That evening, sitting alone on her small patio as the sky turned dusty rose, Elena felt a wave of despair wash over her. Was this her future? Constantly shrinking under the weight of casual remarks, her confidence eroding bit by bit. Then, her eyes fell on a small, worn wooden box on the shelf just inside the door. Ricardo's box. Inside, amongst dried lavender and a few faded photographs, was a small, folded note. She hadn't looked at it in years. His familiar handwriting, bold and slanted. "Elena, my artist, never let anyone dim the light that shines when you create. It's your gift. Believe in it." "Always are," tears welled, blurring the ink. Ricardo had always believed in her, shielding her gently from the harsher edges of his family's pragmatism. He had seen her light. And Carmen's words, however carelessly spoken, were dimming it. No more. She couldn't change Carmen, couldn't silence the village whispers, couldn't bring Ricardo back, but she could change how she received the words. She could choose not to let them extinguish her fragile flame. She folded the note carefully, placing it back in the box, but its message resonated within her. A quiet resolve began to form, tentative but real. She would learn to protect her light. She would start by observing, understanding her own reactions, searching for a different way to respond. Not outwardly, perhaps, but inwardly, where it mattered most. The next encounter happened a few days later, a brief crossing of paths near the fountain in the plaza. The midday sun was warm, the sound of splashing water a soothing backdrop. Carmen, dressed smartly for her errands, stopped beside Elena. "That skirt again, Elena?" Carmen commented, her gaze sweeping down Elena's simple, comfortable linen skirt. "It's practical, I suppose, but rather plain. Doesn't do much for you." Elena felt the automatic flinch, the familiar urge to apologize or justify her choice. But this time, something shifted. Ricardo's words echoed faintly. "Protect your light." She took a quiet breath. Instead of absorbing the critique, she tried a conscious internal maneuver. Minimize. She told herself deliberately, "It's just Carmen's opinion. Her taste isn't mine. It's about her preference, not my worth. She probably thinks she's being helpful." She looked at Carmen, forcing a small, neutral smile. "It's comfortable for working in the studio, Carmen." No defense, no explanation beyond a simple fact. Carmen shrugged, perhaps expecting more of a reaction, and launched into a complaint about the price of olives. Elena listened, but the barb about her skirt seemed smaller now. Less potent. It hadn't pierced as deeply. It wasn't a victory, not exactly, but it was a difference. A tiny space created between the comment and her feeling. A start. A week later, another opportunity arose, this time at the small weekly market. Elena was buying vegetables when she saw Carmen haggling fiercely with the fruit vendor, her face tight with irritation. Later, Carmen approached Elena, sighing dramatically. "Honestly, the prices these days. It's impossible. And Manuel's brother is visiting next week, expecting the full treatment. Sometimes I think—" She trailed off, then seemed to refocus on Elena. "You're lucky, Elena, just having yourself to worry about. Though your tomatoes look a bit soft today, didn't you check them properly?" Normally the implied criticism, however minor, coupled with the backhanded compliment about her solitude, would have rankled. But today, Elena saw not just the words, but the woman speaking them. She saw the genuine stress lines around Carmen's eyes, the slight tremor of frustration in her voice from her earlier haggling, the weight of her own obligations. An unexpected feeling surfaced, not hurt, but a flicker of empathy. She's not attacking me, Elena thought, the realization surprisingly clear. She's stressed. She's projecting her own frustrations. This isn't really about my tomatoes or my life. It's about hers. This understanding shifted her internal landscape dramatically. Instead of feeling defensive, she felt a sense of detachment, almost compassion. The comment about the tomatoes lost its sting entirely. "It sounds like you have a lot on your plate with the visit, Carmen," Elena said, her tone calm and even, devoid of the usual underlying tension. "I hope it goes smoothly for you." Carmen blinked, visibly taken aback. She seemed momentarily unsure how to respond to this unexpected neutral sympathy. "Ah, yes, well, one manages," she mumbled before turning away to examine some oranges with renewed vigor. Elena finished her shopping, a quiet sense of revelation settling within her. She hadn't changed the words, but by understanding the possible source, Carmen's own stress, she had changed their power. They hadn't landed. She felt lighter, freer than she had in months. This felt more natural, more effective than simply trying to minimize the words. Empathy. Understanding the person behind the comment. It resonated deeply with her own nature. Perhaps this was the key. The annual Feria de San Juan approached, transforming the usually sleepy Pueblo Blanco into a vibrant hub of activity. Strings of colored lights crisscrossed the plaza, paper lanterns swayed in the warm evening breeze, and the air pulsed with the rhythms of flamenco music drifting from makeshift stages. Stalls selling everything from handmade jewelry to sticky churros lined the narrow streets. There was a palpable energy, a mix of excitement and tradition. Elena had, after much internal debate, decided to participate. Not with a large, ambitious display, but a small table tucked into a slightly quieter corner of the plaza, showcasing some of her best recent work. Elegantly simple bowls glazed in earthy tones, small vases perfect for single blooms, tactile ceramic birds. Setting up felt like bearing a part of her soul, vulnerability amplified by the festive crowd. Yet intertwined with the anxiety was a thread of determination, a quiet refusal to keep hiding her light. The initial hours were encouraging. People stopped, admired, commented positively. A few small sales lifted her spirits. Sophia bustled over, full of effusive praise mixed with a whispered, "Carmen's been circling, Elena. Brace yourself." Sophia's nervousness, meant as a friendly warning, momentarily reignited Elena's anxiety. She took a slow, deliberate breath, reminding herself of her recent breakthrough. Empathy, detachment. And then she saw her. Carmen, navigating the crowd with practiced ease, her sharp eyes already fixed on Elena's small display. Manuel trailed dutifully behind her. The festive sounds, laughter, music, vendors' calls, seemed to recede as Carmen stopped directly in front of the table. Elena's heart gave a familiar lurch. She braced herself, watching as Carmen picked up one of the ceramic birds, turning it over in her hands, her expression unreadable but critical. The usual script began to play in Elena's head. The helpful suggestion, the subtle undermining, the comparison to something more practical. But this time, Elena didn't wait for the cue. Before Carmen could utter the expected critique, Elena stepped forward slightly, a calm, neutral smile on her face. She focused on the shared experience of the feria, not the potential judgment. "Carmen, lovely to see you enjoying the feria," Elena said, her voice steady and warm, meeting her sister-in-law's gaze directly. The key was politeness, acknowledgement, but without inviting critique. "This little spot keeps me quite busy right now," she continued, gesturing briefly at her table, subtly indicating her focus was elsewhere. "But the atmosphere is wonderful today, isn't it? The music sounds particularly lively this year." It was a gentle deflection, a polite boundary drawn not with anger or defensiveness, but with calm redirection. Carmen paused, the critical remark visibly arrested on her lips. She looked from the ceramic bird back to Elena, a flicker of surprise, perhaps confusion in her eyes. The expected dynamic had shifted. Elena hadn't taken the bait, hadn't shown the familiar vulnerability. Carmen murmured, placing the bird back carefully, though perhaps a little too firmly. "Yes, quite lively." She offered a curt nod, exchanged a glance with Manuel, and then moved on, absorbed back into the flow of the feria crowd. There had been no confrontation, no sharp words, no dramatic resolution. Yet, standing there amidst the vibrant chaos of the festival, Elena felt a profound, quiet victory bloom within her chest. She hadn't silenced Carmen, hadn't changed her, but she had held her ground, protected her space, kept her inner light steady. She hadn't reacted, she had responded. And in that subtle shift, she found a strength she hadn't known she possessed. The music swelled around her, and for the first time, Elena felt truly a part of the celebration, not just an observer on the edge. A week later, the feria decorations were gone, and the village had settled back into its familiar rhythm. Sunlight streamed into Elena's studio, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The scent of damp clay was earthy and reassuring. She sat at her wheel, her hands steady, guiding the rise of a new vase. The sounds drifting in from the street, a neighbour's call, the distant chime of church bells, the clatter of cafe chairs being set out in the plaza, no longer felt intrusive or laden with potential judgment. They were simply the sounds of her life, the backdrop to her work. She saw Carmen briefly later that morning, watering the already drowning geraniums on her balcony across the way. Their eyes met. Elena offered a simple nod and a small, genuine smile. Carmen returned the nod, her expression neutral, before turning back to her flowers. There was no lingering tension, no familiar knot of anxiety tightening in Elena's stomach. Carmen was still Carmen, likely always would be. But the words, Elena realized with a sense of quiet wonder, had lost their sharp edges. They could still be spoken, but they no longer had the power to wound her so deeply. The hurt hadn't come from the words themselves.